Second session. So, of course, the entire day our focus is to get to have an overview of the Bible. And what we've done so far is just do a bit of introduction about the book itself, and then we've also sort of covered history. History-wise, how does the Bible look? What kind of history does the Bible portray, and where do the books sort of fit in? So we get a broader picture, and hopefully that has come through fine so far, and with a bit of follow-up people can learn that in a deeper way. Now we are getting into a topical approach. Topic-wise, we're going to look at a few things. This session, God. Of course, because God is the ultimate being, we'd like to know, and the entire Bible exists purely because of Him and for Him. It is to reveal Him. It is to record His revelation to us. So it is Him who is the limelight and the hero, the everything that we can hope or dream of. So we do that this session. Next session we'll be looking at problems and solutions. What are the problems in this world, and what are the solutions according to the Bible? And then the final session is where I really wanted to sort of bring together the remaining stuff. And that is why I said it's a bit sort of flexible. But let's see how things go. Okay, God of the Bible. Now if I could ask, maybe ask for a few minutes, people here or people on the live chat or WhatsApp, our WhatsApp group, how do we get to know God? How did people during biblical times get to know God? What kind of insight and information they had? How? What are the mechanisms by which they got to know God?
Sometimes in dreams, God will speak in dreams.
Dreams, yeah. God speaking through dreams.
His word,
yeah, recorded word, yeah. Well, I'm mainly talking about the first-hand sources. So the word at least is a second-hand source for us, even though it's trustworthy because we've gone through some evaluation. We would next session, but first-hand especially. How did people get to know God? First-hand. His actions, and what do you mean by actions? Yeah, some things only He can do. When He does it, you know that's God. Yeah?
Through the prophets.
Through the prophets? What do you mean when you say through the prophets?
Because the prophets would be in touch with God and tell them.
Yeah, but how do the people who are listening know it's from God? When it's spoken through a prophet?
Through the signs and wonders.
Signs, wonders, prophecies coming to pass. So, yes, young man, yes?
Well, God has spoken to the people. For example, Moses, God went down in the form of a burning bush.
That's very good. Sometimes He showed up in person. Yeah, very good, yeah. Anything else? Oh, Brother Simon has given a voice message.
God speaks through other people.
Yeah, God speaks through other people. So people who you know are trustworthy could communicate to you. But I'm especially talking about the biblical times. During the biblical times, so through the Holy Spirit, yeah, impressing upon you a few things, yes. In the Old Testament, in the entire biblical times, not just the Old, but also the New Testament.
He speaks through the scriptures.
Yeah.
Some would have had the scriptures, they would have had the
Even before them. So, for example, for King David, the Torah would already be scriptures. Yeah, yeah. But especially the first time. Okay. So I think we've got a few ideas already, which is really good. Now what I have done is I've just categorized them into six categories there. 1. God in creation. He demonstrated His creative power at multiple points in time. At multiple points in time, by the way. His creative power. God in creation. God in glory. At multiple occasions, God showed up. Not exactly with the glory He has in heaven, but a reasonable approximation. You know, Mount Sinai, when Moses went up, what he would have seen, I mean, if normal people see, they might have gone mad. The absolute glory of God. Remember the word of God says, when He came down, His face shone. People were afraid to look at Him. And so God in glory. And that happened at multiple points in time. Other theophanies, God showed up in normal human form. God showed up in other forms which you can see, not exactly all the brightness and so on, but still see. So other theophanies. And then of course God through signs and wonders and fulfilled prophecies. He says a precise thing and that comes to pass. Well defined, not random stuff. Here is where people claim, of course we know at Speaker's Corner, people claim, our guy has a prophecy also. What kind of prophecy has your guy got? That kind of, you can toss a coin and get to that prophecy. If at all. That is from that is a reliable word from Muhammad. You can toss a coin and get that. Oh, he's going to win. Oh, of course if two people fight, one is going to win. Not too hard. The point is, God of the Bible, when He prophesies, well defined, very well defined, and to an extent you can say, you know what, you couldn't have precisely pinned this down in the way He did. Through a mere prediction, through a mere random prediction. You really can't. For example, I'll give a simple example, but maybe I'll refrain from giving an example now and go through the details in a bit. God in relationship. God had a personal relationship with multiple people in the history of the Bible. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, and prophets of the old, Israel as a nation through the judges and so on. Also in the New Testament times, as a father and so on. And then finally and more importantly for us Christians, God with us. Emmanuel. God showed up. He showed up on the face of the earth to live for 33.5 years with us. If you put all things together based on in Jesus' life, you can't conclude anything else apart from saying, in the appropriate context, apart from saying, this is God. So he took the trouble to come and stay with us 33.5 years. So people during biblical times got to know about God in multiple different ways. First thing I said was God in creation. Of course we have the Genesis creation account. Like I said earlier, Adam would have experienced it. Suddenly you wake up knowing that you didn't exist before, and then seeing this person just by you. And Noah almost saw Adam. He told all those people. In other words, creation account was a very real source of information for them. So we see that Genesis 1-2. We see that, of course, in Noahic flood, God intervened. And by the way, Noahic flood is a very, very historical event. Across the world, various cultures preserve the history of Noahic flood in all sorts of different ways. Various cultures. For example, of course I come from India. In India there's a person called Manu. And he is supposed to be the one guy who is the head of a family of 8 people who were saved when the entire earth was destroyed. He was the only one along with his family to be preserved from a flood. And that's because he built a boat according to how God told him. This is a story which is preserved there. But they call him Manu. The point is, similar stories exist all over the place. 8 people, boat, worldwide flood saved. Purely because they built it and so on. So that kind of information was preserved, so people got to know. Of course, based on that kind of information, what does Job write? 2 to Job, God says this: "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of young lions?" And he goes on. Job 38:39 is a rich treasure trove. Where do you find dinosaurs? Where do you find this and that? 38:39, Job. This is one of the other reasons to say Job was a very early man. So you find that there. And then apart from that, in the book of Job, you find plenty of information about science, about creation and so on. I'm going to skip some of these and then go to the psalmist. What does the psalmist say about the universe, the creation of the universe? He says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tabernacle for the sun," and so on. So the point is, when you examine the details of what we see in the universe out there and carefully study them properly, you get to know that something serious is going on behind the hood here. And of course, there are philosophical approaches to say that what we see out here could not have been possible through even a human being, let alone a stone or something else, or a non-existent nothing. And so for us to have what we have here, someone phenomenal has been there behind the hood. And that is science and Bible. Perhaps that during that session we'll get into the details there. About creation of human beings: "Your hands have made me," said Job. "With him are wisdom and strength, he has counsel and understanding. If he breaks a thing down, it cannot be rebuilt. If he imprisons a man, there can be no release," and so on. So the point is, all of man's life is in God's control. If he wants to enforce things, he can. There is no way, when God wants to enforce something on a person, he can get away outside of what God wants to do, if he wants to. Of course, God doesn't want to do that all the time, but if he wants to. So the point is, that was appreciated by Job again. What does the psalmist say again? "You formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, that my soul knows very well." So again, examining all the creation of a universe, about human beings, about other life forms. Job again gives some details here. The psalmist gives some details. Gives us an insight of who God is in terms of his creation. Now, God in glory. Now, we said earlier, Israel is a nation which began to exist because of the will of God. God said, "Abraham, can you please?" Abraham obeyed, and therefore we had a new beginning. But later on, of course, during the time of Moses, until that time, they were a family, they were a large tribe, and they were slaves, large tribe who were slaves. But now the real serious stuff, land. A family, a large nation, which is from a family with a land. And that will be a huge political issue, of course. And that is where we see God's intervention, mighty intervention. And there in specific, when during the Exodus, the number of times God showed up in glory to Moses, Aaron, and so on, phenomenal. And there are a number of passages I've given. Let me just maybe read through one example. And this is from Exodus 19, 9 to 25. Exodus 19, 9 to 25. And maybe I'll read the next one also. Let's just read this carefully. And this should give us an indication of how the glorious theophanies worked out. Now it came to pass, as Aaron spake to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Sorry, that's Exodus 16:10. The glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And then Exodus 19, like I said earlier, 19, 9 to 25, what do we find? And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. How did the nation of Israel buy into this idea that Moses spoke to God? If he had spoken to God in secrecy, I was in a cave, I was somewhere here, and then suddenly comes out, well, of course we find that some nations that we find today have believed, but believe me, Israel would never have. You need to explore the history of Israel. The multitudes of ideas that were advanced within the nation of Israel, even after the revelation of Yahweh, we would understand how much liberty they had, how critically evaluating they were about all sorts of things. That being the case, why did the nation of Israel come to the conclusion that God spoke to Moses? That's because they saw these magnificent things. Red Sea. Yeah, Red Sea. We're going to look at that briefly maybe in Signs and Wonders. At least Red Sea also. It's tremendous. Who else could do that? The river Jordan split. Who else can do that? But here, God in glory. What does the Lord say? Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear. When God spoke, the nation of Israel heard him speak. And they would believe you forever. And then if I skip a few verses there, maybe I'll read the next section, please. Exodus 20, 18 to 21, please. It says, now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. They were terrified. Can you imagine, let's say we are gathered here. Let's say this is the plain just by Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is just there. They saw Moses go with his entourage, with his few helpers. They saw them go. And then they hear thunderings and lightnings. And there is a cloud that covers. And they hear a voice. They can't perceive it completely, but they are seeing glorious things. And one guy is saying, you know what, maybe I'm going mad. Are you seeing anything here? And 1 million people are saying, yes, of course we are seeing all that. This is how their history began. Well, not entirely true. Their history began with the 10 plagues, even before that. But this is, let's say, the second phase. The 10 plagues, let's say, the first phase. But this is the second phase, and in this phase, they are seeing God's presence. Not just the words of God, which they did see earlier during the 10 plagues. Now God's presence. Who is that who is speaking? God. And in one particular occasion, Moses comes down and they see his face shining. They couldn't deal with that. And so that's the kind of exposure they had. So God in glory. That should give us an example. In Exodus, there are multiple such visitations. Why? God really wanted to make sure that He gives a proper foundation for the people. God of the Bible is not a God who wants blind belief. And that's obviously clear when we read through scriptures. Never ever wants anyone to believe in Him when he has questions in his mind. He shows up in obvious ways, demonstrates, and then expects them to then stick to what they have understood. After this, when Israel disobeys, purely because they are used to being just slaves, and therefore not used to being proper stewards of what they know to be true, because they're used to that, they messed up big time after that. But the point is, God, they still at least appreciated that God is God, and they stuck to that basic understanding. Now, to anyone who is familiar with the Jewish temple, which currently doesn't exist, of course, but when the Jewish temples existed, there are three portions to the temple: the outer court, the holy place, and the most holy place. This is the building temple. The first temple that the nation of Israel got was not a building temple, it was rather a tent with an ark, which the ark was the one which was in the most holy, the holy of holies, the most internal place in the temple. The point is, yeah, that's all beautiful, that's all wonderful. Many other people have temples. You know, if you come to India, there are temples everywhere. If you stumble down, you might see a temple. So what's the deal here? The deal is this. Let me read this, please. Exodus 25, 8 and 9. And let them, I'm reading just a small portion in a very long passage, but this is what he says. This is what God said. He said, let them make me a sanctuary, referring to the tent of tabernacle. The tent of meeting, the tabernacle of meeting. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show you. That is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, just so you shall make it. And see to it, Exodus 25:40, see to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. What is he talking about? Showing? Was he talking about showing, or was he talking about telling? You know, Moses was certainly given instructions. Oh, this is how, these must be the dimensions, these must be the material that you must use, this is how you must structure, and so on. So there was verbal communication also involved. But if you note carefully, what God here is saying is according to the pattern that I showed you, according to its pattern that you were shown. In other words, what Moses saw on the mountain, he just didn't see a rough approximation of God. He saw God in the glory as he would exist in heaven, on his throne with cherubims on either side. Because Moses saw them, in the way he saw them, he is supposed to go down, and in the ark of the tabernacle, in the ark of the covenant, he then needs to have two cherubims in the way he saw. But the ones he saw were real cherubims. These are the representations. You see what I mean? A few different things in the temple were things that Moses saw. And that's a crucial thing I really want to advance. God in glory. God revealed himself in a glorious way for people to be seen, and Moses and Aaron and so on are prime examples of what was of such revelation. I'm going to skip the remaining few verses. They're all in the notes that you have. Maybe I'll just quickly go to Psalm 80 verse 1. The psalmist says, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock, you who dwell between the cherubim. Where did this idea come from? Dwell between the cherubim. Well, they had seen Moses, they had heard that Moses saw it, that this God dwells between cherubims. And they also heard, and that is why we have it like that in our temple. You see what I'm saying? So that information of the detailed visitation that God had with Moses was widely known. Again, Psalm 99:1, he dwells between the cherubim. Now, of course, similarly, what happened in the New Testament time? So far, we've been focusing much on Old Testament. Of course, even in history, I did only 5 minutes of New Testament. That's primarily because New Testament history, some of us would be much more familiar with. That's why I took the liberty. But let's look at a similar thing. Matthew 17:1-8. Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. Remember, we spoke about the prophet like unto Moses. The prophet. So Moses would have been in their mind. What's happening here? Up a mount. And his face is shining now. A prophet like unto Moses. Moses' face shining when he came down. But this is of course much more than that. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them. So Peter, James and John I don't know what they spoke to Moses and Elijah. I don't know if they even spoke anything. But the fact is they are seeing them. How did they recognize them is a different question. I would say essentially by the content of the communication. Of course, they had no reason to question the credibility of these people because they're all glorious. Looking at them, they're all glorious. So they wouldn't dare to say, oh, how dare you say, oh Moses, you don't look like Moses. They wouldn't dare to say that. And therefore they're going to take their word to determine who they really are, to take them at their word. And what did they say? Maybe Jesus might have said, oh Moses, you know what, we'll finish this work up properly. I don't know what they discussed. Through what they might have discussed, the disciples might have understood. And so then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, and behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. Again, what would this remind them of? Thick clouds descended upon Mount Sinai. Now bright cloud descended, overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. So why did the Christians believe in Jesus? Well, because whether they understood theology or not, whether they understood our Messiah is supposed to be God, because that's what prophecies say or not, is a later story. They got very precise, simple instructions. Whatever he says, do it. Whatever he says, believe it. Period. Who am I who is speaking? You can see I am not someone on the face of the earth. You can see I am speaking from heaven. And that is the message that Peter and James and John received. And that's why in one of Peter's epistles he'd say, we did not believe in wisely crafted fables, but we beheld the glory of God. And that is why a fisherman like Peter became a master theologian, because of the revelation that he had. Similarly, Paul, before becoming Paul, bright light. The Lord Jesus in his glory blinded him. So again, revelation of glory. Okay, so that's one. God showing up in glory, in person as theophanies. For us to perceive, not when you're asleep, but when you're awake. But God can show up in glory even in visions. And a few such occasions are mentioned. Psalm 18, 6-12. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before him, even to his ears. When the earth shook and trembled, the foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken, because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils. So what did the psalmist see? The psalmist saw things which even pertain to smoke coming out of nostrils of God, and fire, devouring fire from his mouth. So he was seeing all these things in the vision, the glory of God. So I'll skip the remaining things. Isaiah, what did prophet Isaiah see? In the year that King Josiah, Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1-4. In the year that King Josiah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. He saw it. In the glory, he saw it. Sitting on a throne and lifted up. And the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. He is able to even describe the seraphims. 6 wings with 2 he covered his face, 2 his feet, and 2 with 2 he flew, and so on. Again, the whole earth is full of his glory. Again, visions of the glory of God. Similarly, Ezekiel had visions of the glory of God, but in this, in Ezekiel's case, it was glory of God in the temple of the Lord. Not in heaven. He wasn't looking at the heavens, but he was looking at the temple. And in the temple he saw visions of the glory of God. Similarly, Daniel, this might have been a bit more familiar passage. What did Daniel see? I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, his wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. This is the Ancient of Days, who he describes as the Ancient of Days. But then he goes on to describe one like the Son of Man. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Point here is, prophets also saw God in glory. Not just simple visions, but visions of the glory of heaven, of things that were happening in heaven, and so on. Okay, and what did Brother Stephen, Operation Stephen, after whom Operation Stephen has been named, but he, being full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God, and said, Look, I see the heavens opened, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. So Stephen sees it, and therefore he confidently testifies. Other visions, Revelation is, of course, is a classic example. Revelation 1, 9 to 20, and a few other passages in Revelation. I'm going to skip the remaining just in the interest of time and move to theophanies, other theophanies. Theophany is essentially where God shows up in a way humans can perceive through their physical faculties, eyes or hear and so on. And we saw, Moses also saw using his own eyes, so that's also a kind of theophany, but that's a theophany in glory. Now let's look at a few other, just go through briefly. Theophanies in a slightly less glorious form, like human beings, showing up as human beings. Abraham experienced that. Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, experienced that. Jacob experienced that. Moses experienced that. Joshua, Moses, the experience of the burning bush is the theophany I've categorized here under this title. Joshua experienced that. Joshua came, maybe I don't know if some of these things are familiar, but Abraham saw 3 men coming to him. But obviously in the knowledge that he had, he knew it was the Lord. How did he know that and so on is a different story. Today I'm not exploring why we believe what has been said, but what I'm saying is such claims or such revelations are in scriptures. So Abraham met God as 3 men who came to him. Similarly, Hagar met God. To an extent she said, oh, I've seen God. I don't know if you've heard the name El Roi, which is a name for God, El Roi, and that name was given by Hagar. And the reason she gave that name was because she said, today I have seen God just like how He has seen me. And that's why El Roi, the God who sees, He has seen me. Jacob wrestled with God. That's perhaps a bit more popular. There was a bit of a wrestling match between God and Moses. The background to that is Jacob was a bit of a troublemaker. He was a bit of a trouble. He knows what is good, but he doesn't know how to get it. He doesn't know the good way to get it. He goes around the bad way to get it. But because he knows what was good, God was pleased with him. And so what he decided to do was that he'll correct him. He'll discipline him. And one of the important disciplines came to him at a stage where Joseph's hip was dislocated. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And that was as a result of this wrestling match. God came and he wrestled. The intention, Muslims pick this up. Oh, how can a mere man Jacob beat God? Well, God never intended to beat Jacob. That wasn't the point. Point was to test how sincerely persevering Jacob was going to be, and that God was going to give him the final sort of correction by leaving a mark in his own physical body. Just imagine, the troublemaker Jacob now has to limp. So all his trouble would have gone out through the window. That's what God did. I know you're a troublemaker, I need to change you, and the way I'm going to change you is put you through rigorous stress. We know the idea of refining through fire. Jacob went through that. So theophany is involved there. Okay. So that kind. Apart from that, the sort of less known theophanies, I'd like to point out Samson's parents. Samson's parents met God. The birth of Samson was announced to them even before he was born, and the fact that he needed to be a Nazarite was commanded to them. He's supposed to be a Nazarite. That's how you need to bring him up. But the thing is, on the first occasion when his mom met God, she was too afraid, she didn't even ask who that was. She knew that was someone special, a glorious person, but she didn't want to ask his name. So he goes back, her husband asks her, well, what is his name? Did he not ask his name? And then the person shows up again. And then get to know a bit more information. The husband asks, what is your name? And remarkably, the person who stood there, he said, why do you ask my name? Knowing that my name is Wonderful. Why is this important? Isaiah later on gave us the information. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor. It's not Wonderful Counselor, it's rather Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and so on. And Samson's parents got to know him as that Wonderful. So that is another less known theophany. Another less known theophany is God meeting Gideon. God came and met Gideon. God told him, well, you're going to help Israel out. Gideon wasn't confident that he could do that. God gave him an opportunity to test him. Gideon tested, and at the end of the test he concluded that it was God who was speaking, and he would somehow make this happen. Other theophanies, at the baptism of Jesus, John saw the Holy Spirit descending like a dove. So that's the dove. So he could see it with his own eyes. Of course, another one is on the day of Pentecost. Tongues of fire. What does it say? Then there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and one sat upon each of them. So they actually saw like tongues which are caught up in fire, slowly coming down and resting upon them. And then of course they also had the gift of tongue, speaking out in tongues. So that's a theophany, seeing that happen. And I think I haven't mentioned a few other things here, but essentially these theophanies are also very important for those people to get to know about God, and for them to then record, for us to evaluate at a later point in time. Signs and wonders, we spoke about this a bit earlier. At the start of the nation of Israel, all sorts of signs. A rod turning to a snake, and that rod eating the other snakes of the magicians of Egypt. 10 plagues, the Lord fighting with the army of the Egyptians, the Egyptian army drowning. Sea going like that at the right time, and then going back at the right time. So it wasn't a coincidental incident. They can clearly see it. Sea splitting is not a coincidence. I think no one would dare describe that as a coincidence. But even if they were tempted to do that, well, why would it go back again? So that's what happened to drown the Pharaoh's armies. Mara's bitter water becoming sweet, bitter water becoming sweet, bread and meat from heaven, manna. They had manna from heaven right through their journey. They had water coming out from a rock which did not give out water before, purely because Moses beat that. They had quails. They had dinner prepared from all sorts of people who they didn't see, and coming to them in all sorts of interesting ways. Serpent lifted up in the wilderness, a bronze serpent. Not sure if you're familiar with this. Essentially, the Lord was upset with them because of something. He was going to destroy them, but then He gave them a last chance, and that was to say, if you see this serpent, you would live. And Moses essentially had to make a serpent, a bronze serpent, and then all that people have to do if they are impacted because of the plague the Lord had sent is just look at it. If they look at it, they'll be healed. And that's exactly what they did. Any questions so far? Yes.
Questions? Where?
Would you say that when Moses met God, he met Jesus? Because we know the Bible says nobody has met God. So would you say at that stage, Moses met Jesus?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that.
But
So-
Jesus hadn't come up until that point, so he wouldn't have met Jesus. It was while he met God, as we know, because the Trinity was only fulfilled once Christ came. Then it became the Trinity. And prior to that, it was only called the duo, the Spirit and God.
That is something we're going to explore in detail in an upcoming module. But the point would be, brother, the triune nature of God is an eternal nature.
Yes.
Is an eternal nature. And we would see that throughout the Old Testament. We would see how that constantly pans out. And the fact of the matter is, many a times when normally Jews would see, oh, this is Yahweh speaking, with later information we clearly see that that could have been only the Son who was speaking, not the Father. And I think that is where her point was coming. But to comment on your point, brother, is the Trinity was an eternal fact. The only thing which changed in human history or during our times is the fact that one of those three persons became slightly lower than angels, i.e. took up human form. That is the only change. But he eternally existed right through.
So going back to what the sister said was, so Moses would have met Jesus at that point.
Yes.
But would have only known him as creator, not as Jesus.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had a specialized knowledge. Certainly Israel would have had an idea at various stages in time, incrementally developing that this God is a super complex God in all sorts of different ways, but also in the sense of the number of persons. I'll give you a simple example. Abraham, the three persons who came. There were three men who came. But when the three men came, according to scriptures, if you carefully note, he fell before all three and called them Lord. But later on, we also find two of them went away and they are then called angels, and this man, one man, was still called Lord God. So they would have certainly seen there is a complexity which is going on behind the hood. But with retrospective information that we have, which Abraham might not have had at his own time, we clearly understand who Moses met was Jesus, albeit in his glory. Jesus in his glory is also like the Father in his glory, because they shared the same glory. Yeah, that's it. What's that? Jacob and the angel. So there is the expression of the angel of the Lord, Malach Adonai. At a few different occasions when people met the Malach Adonai, they then explicitly say, oh, I have seen God yet not died. So the expression clearly was connected to God himself. So they made that connection. We understand that retrospectively. But whether they understood there are three persons and so on, in the way we understand, is something we need to discuss in detail.
I'd say another possible theophany is Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, brother. So, in other words, this is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of imagination. But as a matter of fact, I haven't even completed this document. Hopefully, this would become reasonably a bit more complete. And even then, it might not be comprehensive. It's supposed to be only sort of an overview of scriptures to give us all these sort of facets of revelation. But very good point. That would be considered as another theophany, where they clearly see, well, this guy, where did he come from? He suddenly shows up here with their own physical eyes. They saw him. Okay. Now, in terms of what shall we say? So, in terms of signs and wonders, we see that also in the New Testament. We said Israel heard God speak when Moses went up Mount Sinai. Similarly, we saw in the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John heard a voice coming from heaven. And another occasion, John 12, 27, 29, 2:29. Now it's not just Peter, James, and John. It's a wider crowd. And it says, now my soul is troubled. Jesus is saying this. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this very hour, this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. A voice was being heard. Therefore, the people who stood by and heard it said that it had thundered. How did that voice sound like to them? Like thundering. And then others said, an angel has spoken to him. So essentially similar things happen in the New Testament times also, apart from Jesus himself being on the face of the earth. Of course, Jesus himself demonstrated the signs and wonders of God, but apart from that. Okay, prophecies is the next section. God in glory, other theophanies, God through signs and wonders. Now the prophecies, signs and wonders and prophecies. In this section, there are plenty of prophecies, many times which many Christians wouldn't be aware of. Why do we trust the prophets? Of course, we'd be aware of messianic prophecies. Yeah, messianic prophecies, which of course came to be fulfilled only 2000 years ago. Or let's say 1000 years after they first heard them. Some of them. But why did they trust in them before that? Of course, Moses and so on, signs and wonders. So they already had that introduction. On top of that, they had signs and wonders happening here and there, Elijah, fire from heaven, and so on. But also there was a steady flow of prophecies coming in, many of which corresponded to their immediate future. And they saw them come to pass. And because of that, they believed. There are plenty of examples I've given here, but all of them are very similar. I'll stick to one example here, please. This is not a verse, by the way. This is my own paraphrasing, which I copied from another set of notes that I had prepared. Jeroboam was judged. Prophet Ahijah prophesies that dogs and birds shall eat whoever belongs to Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the first of the kings of the northern Israel. First of the kings, and a prophet called Ahijah. Of course, a less known prophet. A prophet called Ahijah prophesied that dogs and birds shall eat whoever belongs to this man. All his family would be eaten by dogs and birds. Now that is a prophecy. See what I mean? This is not some tossing the coin, or maybe this might happen, or he'd die before 50 years. Well, it may happen, may not happen. Even if it happens, it's not clear that happened purely because you said that. But imagine this, a king's family, dogs and birds eating them? Doesn't normally happen. Yes, brother?
Just thinking about prophecy though, isn't it? There's a difference, isn't there, between us and Islam in that it's not just about telling of an event or something that's going to happen. It's telling about the situation now. So it could be about telling, being honest and quite hard about actually how we are as people. So I think of Isaiah, what he says to the nations, what he says to Israel about their situation. I think about Habakkuk and the others, and they say, and he says, these houses you've built, you know, I think in particular of Habakkuk, I suppose. You know, there's real, there were two words that the old Christians used to use about prophecy. One is forthtelling and one is foretelling. Forthtelling is about you and your situation now. What do you need to change?
Yeah.
The other thing is about actually saying this is going to happen.
Yeah. So, yes, absolutely. I agree with you in the sense that prophets have two roles to play, at the least. And only one of them is what we're talking about here, which is forthtelling. But the other is very valid also, foretelling. But my point at this juncture is, I really don't care if someone is foretelling or not, if he is lying about whether God sent him or not. You see what I mean? I mean, I could tell you the truth. I could say, you know what, something, let's say, some person, he's 6 feet tall. The Lord told me he's 6 feet tall. Well, I could say the truth. I mean, in this case, of course, it's a very objective truth, but I could say something which is a bit more detailed, a bit more, let's say, hidden, I could say, as long as I can perceive it, but it can still not be from God. You see what I'm saying? But here my point is, how do we know God's interaction with the world? And there the way we can establish God's interaction in the case of a prophet is through a way where we clearly can see what he has done is supernatural. Either he clearly predicts and that happens, or he really tells something which otherwise no one can ever say. That is true. But are you with me on that? Yeah, cool.
It's just, all I want to do is just say that there is a difference between the way Islam understands the prophetic and the way we do.
Islam has got all sorts of things wrong. All sorts of things wrong. And of course we need to, that's very unfortunate because many Muslims are caught up in it. Very, very unfortunate. And the reason they're quite happy where they are is purely because they don't know the real stuff. They don't know the real stuff. They really don't know the real Jesus. And this is where we need to take the message to them in clarity, in truth and in comprehensiveness. And then I'm sure at least the well-intending Muslims would then say, wait a second, that's so much better than what I've heard. And that's sounding a lot more logically good, valid, and so on. So I think, but apart from that, my evaluation is, I really can't, I'm at loss of words as to how people could have really bought into the system. And I think that's where the history comes in, that's where the threat of violence and so on come in. And I can imagine how people could have said, I'm not convinced, but I know I'll be killed, otherwise I'm okay, fine, okay, sort of thing. And that then propagated from one generation to another. But apart from that, I don't see a logically sound framework